Okay, so have you ever just like stopped and thought about how much your body has like changed even just since last year? It's pretty wild when you think about it all. Like going from those awkward growth spurts to, hopefully having a bit more coordination now.
You're absolutely right. It makes you wonder what's going on beneath the surface, right?
Totally. So that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today.
Hmm.
Like the fascinating world of like physical development and just how our bodies age throughout, well, our whole lifespan.
We've got some really solid research here that maps out all the big changes we experience literally from birth to, well, old age.
So listeners, get ready, because our mission today is to give you a deep understanding of how your body grows and changes across your entire life.
We're going to unpack the incredible journey of your brain, the really vital role that sleep plays, and even the mysteries of why and how we age.
It's basically a cheat sheet to understanding, well, your own physical timeline, from those early baby days to, what might be in store for us all down the road.
We'll be covering a lot of ground, looking at those fundamental patterns of body growth, the intricate development of the brain, the ever-changing rhythms of sleep, and obviously the biological processes behind aging.
Okay, so let's start unpacking all this, back to the basics. How our bodies actually grow and change. Turns out, even something as basic as growth follows a pretty specific set of rules, right?
You got it. There are two major patterns we see in early growth: cephalocaudal and proximodistal. Cephalocaudal basically translates to, well, head to tail.
That kid's a tail.
Yeah, it describes how we grow faster at the top, like our head, and then it kind of trickles down.
So like those baby pictures where their heads just look huge.
Exactly. Think about early ultrasounds. We're just, holding a newborn. The head is proportionally, well, massive, and that reflects that initial brain development.
It's like this little body with this giant head leading the way.
Haha. Yeah, you could say that.
But it's not just about size, right?
Mm.
Like, doesn't this top-down thing affect other development stuff too?
Absolutely. Think about sensory and motor skills. Babies usually get visual control before they have good control over their torso, right?
That makes sense.
They also use their hands before crawling or walking. It's that cephalocaudal principle in action. But, development isn't always a perfect textbook case.
Mhm.
There was this one study, actually, where some infants were reaching for toys with their feet before their hands.
Really? Their feet?
I know. It was kind of surprising. It kind of suggests that those early leg movements are way more coordinated than we thought. And that maybe, just maybe, a strict top-down view is a bit, well, simplistic.
So even these basic patterns have their own quirks. Okay, so what about that other pattern, the proximodistal?
Ah, yes. Proximodistal is all about growth moving from the center of the body outwards. So think about it. Your core muscles and upper arms develop before those in your hands and fingers.
Like when babies grab stuff with their whole fist first.
Exactly. Before they get those fine motor skills to use individual fingers, it's like those central structures kind of got to lay the groundwork first.
Makes sense. Now, growth isn't just this smooth upward climb, is it?
Nope. It happens in bursts. Especially during infancy, those growth spurts can be kind of dramatic. Some studies showed babies gaining almost an inch in length in a single day. And their head circumference also increased, noticeably in these short bursts too.
Whoa, an inch in a day. That's wild.
It is. It just shows how rapidly infants are developing in those early months.
Okay, so let's zoom in on those early years. What are the typical height and weight changes during, say, infancy?
Well, the average newborn here in North America comes in around 20 inches long, weighing about 7.5 pounds.
Okay.
But there's a healthy range around those averages, obviously. And get this, most newborns actually lose a little weight in those first few days, just as they adjust,
Makes sense.
But then they start packing on the pounds, often several ounces a week in that first month. And by 4 months, most babies have doubled their birth weight.
Wow.
And by their first birthday, tripled it.
That is a lot of growth. And their length.
Oh yeah, it jumps up too, almost an inch a month, leading to about a 40% increase in their first year.
So does it keep going at that crazy speed?
Not quite. It slows way down in that second year. By the time a kid's 2, they might weigh between 26 and 32 pounds, but that's way slower than their first year.
Sure.
And height-wise, by age 2, they're usually about half their adult height.
Okay, so that first year is just this huge growth explosion. It lays the groundwork for sure. What about early childhood then, those preschool years?
Well, during early childhood, the rate of growth, the percentage, actually decreases each year.
Okay.
And here's a fun fact. Girls are only slightly smaller and lighter than boys at this stage.
Interesting.
You'll also see their body proportions change. They start to slim down as their trunks lengthen, and they lose that kind of chubby baby look, the top-heavy look by the end of preschool.
Right.
And body fat slowly decreases too. But girls will usually have a bit more fatty tissue, while boys have more muscle.
So a 5-year-old looks way different from a 2-year-old, not just in size.
You got it. 5-year-olds have longer legs, a longer trunk compared to, say, a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
And it's during early childhood that those individual differences in, size and build really start to show.
Right, right.
Genetics play a role, obviously, but things like a kid's ethnic background and, importantly, their nutrition, those also make a big difference in how tall they get.
We all know that one kid who was, like, way taller than everyone else.
For sure.
But then there's the opposite. Like, sometimes kids are noticeably shorter than their peers. What's going on there?
It could be a few things. Some kids might have, congenital conditions. Others might not have enough growth hormone. Or maybe physical problems during childhood, or even things like if their mom smoked during pregnancy. Even emotional stress can affect growth.
Wow.
I know, right? There's been research on growth hormone treatments, and it's been shown to help some kids reach a typical height.
Oh, okay.
But figuring out if a kid actually has a growth hormone deficiency, that can be tricky.
So it's really a mix of things impacting growth in those early years. What happens then in middle and late childhood, like elementary and middle school?
Well, growth becomes more gradual and consistent, usually about 2 to 3 inches a year. And by 8 years old, the average kid's around 4'2".
Okay.
Weight gain is pretty steady too, about 5 to 7 pounds a year.
Hmm.
All that's mainly due to the bones and muscles growing and the organs getting bigger, and you'll see them getting stronger, losing more of that baby fat.
Right.
And their proportions change again, smaller heads and waists compared to their height, and their legs get longer, so they start to look more like, mini adults.
So basically their bodies are getting ready for puberty.
You got it. And that's when things get interesting again, right?
Definitely. Things start changing so fast.
Absolutely. Puberty is like this whole cascade of changes all kicked off by, the brain and hormones.
Hormones.
Yeah, it usually starts in early adolescence, and it's a time of big changes. Like, think back to your own early teens. Pretty wild stuff, huh?
Let's just say I have some interesting yearbook photos from that era.
Uh-huh. I think we all do.
So what's the typical order of all these changes for, like, guys and girls?
Okay, so for boys, things usually start with the penis and testicles getting bigger. Then comes straight pubic hair. The voice starts to change a bit, and then, usually the first ejaculation. Then curly pubic hair, then their big growth spurt. Armpit hair, the voice deepens even more, and finally, facial hair.
Wow, that is a lot.
For girls, it often starts with breast development and pubic hair, then armpit hair, then their big growth spurt, their hips get wider, and then kind of later in the whole puberty thing comes menarche. That's a girl's first period.
Right.
And in the beginning, those cycles can be kind of irregular.
Okay, so while all that's happening, height and weight are also changing a ton during puberty.
Big time. Early on, girls are often as heavy or even heavier than boys. But then boys usually catch up around 14 or so. And height's similar, actually. Girls might be taller than boys in the beginning, but boys usually catch up and then some by the end of middle school. What's really interesting, though, is the timing of the peak growth spurt. It happens earlier for girls, like around 11 and a half. For boys, it's more like 13 and a half.
And during that spurt, boys usually grow a bit more each year.
Yeah, that's right.
So what's driving all this? It's got to be hormones, right?
Definitely. There's this flood of hormones, these chemical messengers being produced and sent all over the body. The key players are the hypothalamus in the brain, the pituitary gland, and the gonads. That's the testes for guys, ovaries for girls.
Ah, the birds and the bees stuff.
Right. So the pituitary gland, sometimes called the master gland, it sends signals to those gonads telling them to produce hormones, mostly testosterone for boys, and estradiol, a type of estrogen for girls. And those hormones, they're what cause most of those big changes we see.
And the levels of those hormones, they must be going crazy during adolescence.
Oh, yeah. They spike, dramatically. Testosterone levels, especially in boys, that's what causes the male reproductive system to develop. Muscle growth, the deeper voice, the height increase. And in girls, it's the estradiol that really increases. And that leads to breast development, the uterus maturing, and skeletal growth.
And it's important to remember that both guys and girls have both testosterone and estradiol, right?
Exactly. It's just that testosterone dominates in males and estradiol in females. It's what drives those sex-specific changes.
Now, the timing of puberty, it seems like everyone goes through it at a different pace. What causes those differences?
Well, there's a basic genetic plan, but a ton of things can actually impact when puberty starts. Nutrition, overall health, stress levels, environmental stuff.
So many factors.
I know. And research has even linked higher BMI in childhood to an earlier start of puberty.
Interesting.
Yeah, and sadly, there's also a connection between child sexual abuse and earlier puberty onset.
That's awful.
It is, but it's important to remember that there's a whole range of what's considered normal for puberty starting and ending for both boys and girls.
So many different factors all playing together. And of course, puberty isn't just physical, right?
Nope, not at all. There's a big psychological and social side to it, too.
Totally.
Adolescents start paying a lot more attention to their bodies, their image, and we often see differences in how boys and girls perceive their bodies. Boys tend to be more positive, while girls are often more negative.
Why is that?
Could be a few reasons,
Uh,
Societal standards, the fact that girls typically gain more body fat during puberty, and then there's social media.
yes, social media.
Studies have linked it to more body dissatisfaction.
So true.
And then think about the experience of kids who mature early or late compared to their peers.
Yeah.
That can really impact them psychologically.
Oh, yeah.
Some research shows that, for example, boys who mature later might feel more self-conscious about their bodies, especially in early high school, compared to those who mature earlier. But it's not always a plus to mature early either. Some older studies found that those late bloomers actually ended up with a more positive sense of themselves by their 30s. For girls, the research is a bit more complex, but early maturation has been linked to, well, some challenges.
Like what?
Like a higher chance of getting involved in risky behaviors.
It's interesting how it all balances out in the end.
It is.
So we've got all these crazy transformations happening during adolescence on all these different levels. What happens next as we move into early adulthood? Does the body finally, chill out?
Well, in early adulthood, which is usually from the late teens into the 30s, your height pretty much stays the same. You typically reach your peak joint function in your 20s, and your peak muscle tone and strength in your late teens and 20s too. But, and here's the catch, even those peak levels might start to decline just a little in your 30s. You might see some early signs of aging too, like less skin elasticity, maybe some fine lines.
So even in our 20s, when we feel like we're at our physical best, things are already changing on a cellular level.
You got it. Generally, peak physical performance in a lot of areas actually happens before 30, somewhere between the late teens and mid-20s, usually. Of course, it depends on what kind of activity we're talking about.
Sure.
Like athletes who need quick bursts of power, they might peak earlier than those marathon runners or golfers. But it's also inspiring to see some folks just crush it way past those typical peak ages,
Oh, absolutely. People like Serena Williams, Tom Brady,
Right.
amazing. It really highlights the range of individual experiences and the impact of training and, of course, genetics. So after that kind of stable period of early adulthood, what happens in middle adulthood, like from 40 to 65 generally?
Middle adulthood is where those physical changes become more noticeable. And it's important to remember the speed of those changes, well, it varies a lot from person to person. Genetics, lifestyle, they all play a role.
Yeah.
It's also a good time to really focus on those preventative health measures.
So what are the most common changes people see in middle adulthood?
Well, you start seeing more obvious signs of aging. People lose some height as those bones in the spine, well, they can lose density. And a lot of people gain weight. Metabolism might slow down, body fat often increases. Your skin changes too, more wrinkles, sagging.
Oh,
I know, right? That's because the fat and collagen under the skin, they decrease. You might also see age spots, which are just changes in skin pigment. And hair, well, it often thins and turns gray. That's just from hair being replaced more slowly and less melanin being produced.
right.
And you know what's been linked to more sagging and wrinkles?
What?
Smoking.
Ugh. Makes sense, though.
Yeah, and since our society is kind of obsessed with youth, a lot of people in middle age try things like cosmetic surgery, hair dye, to try to look younger.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
We also see, sadly, an increase in obesity in this age group, which can lead to a bunch of health problems.
It's not just about how we look on the outside, though, right? What's going on with our strength, the joints, bones, all that good stuff during middle age.
Right. We see sarcopenia, which is basically age-related muscle loss. You lose both muscle mass and strength. It can be about 1 to 2% loss each year after 50, and it often hits the back and legs the hardest. And get this, obesity can actually be a risk factor for sarcopenia.
Really?
Yep. And then there's bone density. It usually peaks in our 30s and then starts to decline, and that loss often speeds up in the 50s, especially for women.
Right.
And less bone density means a higher chance of fractures, and they heal slower too. The good news is eating lots of fruits and veggies seems to help with bone density.
So staying active and eating healthy is super important in middle age.
Yeah.
What about our insides, like the heart, lungs, all that?
Well, the chance of getting heart disease goes up a lot in middle adulthood. Cholesterol levels tend to rise, and especially the bad kind of cholesterol,
Wow.
LDL, that can build up in your arteries, which is called atherosclerosis. It basically means hardening of the arteries. And blood pressure usually starts to go up too in the 40s and 50s, so hypertension becomes more of a problem. Women's blood pressure usually jumps up after menopause too, but thankfully there are medicines that can lower cholesterol and blood pressure, which can really help people live longer, healthier lives.
That's good to hear.
Oh yeah, and exercise and healthy eating are super important too. And lung capacity, it's usually fine until about 55. But then the tissues in the lungs can get less stretchy, the chest wall stiffens, so you can't exchange oxygen as well.
Right.
And of course, smoking makes all those changes way worse, way faster.
Yeah, that's not a surprise.
And we can't forget about changes in, well, sexuality during middle age, especially menopause for women. It's a big one.
Definitely.
We call that midlife period when fertility declines, climacteric. Menopause is specifically when a woman hasn't had a period for a whole year, and it usually happens in the late 40s or early 50s. In the past, people viewed menopause negatively,
Yeah.
but more recent research says it's not necessarily a bad experience, although not being able to have kids anymore is a big life change for sure.
Absolutely.
Men don't really have a male menopause with a clear endpoint like that, but their testosterone levels usually do go down gradually.
Okay.
And that might change some things with their sexual function and energy levels, but they can usually still have kids.
So lots of changes going on in middle adulthood, both inside and out.
Mm-hmm.
So then what's late adulthood like? Generally after 65.
Well, those outward aging signs become even more, well, prominent. People often get shorter and sometimes they lose weight because of muscle loss. And the heart and blood vessels, their function keeps declining, often faster.
Right.
High blood pressure is really common in older adults. Keeping that blood pressure healthy is super important at this stage to lower the risk of heart attacks and strokes. But even mobility can be helped by things like losing weight and exercising.
So understanding these changes throughout life can really help us make smart choices about our health. Okay, let's shift gears and dive into something else super important. The brain. How does it develop and change as we go through life?
Well, neuroscience has come a long way in understanding the brain. It's really amazing what we know now. A lot of that understanding comes from the neuroconstructivist view.
Neuroconstructivist. Sounds complicated. What is it exactly?
Basically, it says our brains aren't just pre-programmed by our genes, it's more interactive than that. Our genes and our experiences, they work together all the time, shaping how our brains are structured and how they function.
Oh, okay.
And the brain is really adaptable, what we call plastic. It develops based on, well, the context of our lives. It's not just nature versus nurture, it's both, all the time, back and forth.
I like that.
And all this brain development is totally connected to our cognitive development, how we think and learn. It either helps those abilities grow or sometimes it limits them.
Wow, so even as adults, our experiences are shaping our brains.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into the basics of the brain itself, its structure.
Okay, so the brain is divided into two hemispheres, left and right. And each of those has 4 lobes. We've got the frontal lobe at the front, the parietal lobe behind it, the temporal lobe on the sides, and the occipital lobe at the back. And those lobes, they all have different jobs. But the real stars of the brain, those are the neurons. They're the ones processing everything.
The neuron.
Yeah. So a neuron has a main body and then an axon that sends signals to other neurons and dendrites that receive signals from other neurons. And that communication happens at these special junctions called synapses. And at those synapses, they use chemicals called neurotransmitters. It's super complex, billions of neurons, each one connecting to potentially thousands of others.
That's mind-boggling.
It is. We're talking trillions of connections. And to help those signals move faster, most axons are covered in this fatty layer called the myelin sheath. It acts like insulation.
So we often hear that the left brain is logical and the right brain is creative. Is that actually true?
To a point, yeah. It's called lateralization, meaning some functions are mostly controlled by one side of the brain.
Okay.
So for most right-handed people, the left side is more dominant for language, speech, grammar. The right side is usually more involved in spatial stuff, recognizing faces, humor, metaphors.
Interesting.
Newer research also says the right side might be more important for attention and emotions, but it's really important to understand that most things like reading, learning a new skill, listening to music, those use both sides of the brain together.
It's not as simple as being left-brained or right-brained.
Exactly. It's a team effort. And the degree of lateralization, how much one side dominates, can even change as we get older.
Fascinating. Let's go back to the beginning, infancy. What are some of the big brain changes happening then?
Well, brain development during those early years, both before and after birth, it's just incredible. It really sets the stage for everything that comes later. There have been so many amazing researchers who've helped us understand the infant brain. Like Martha Ann Bell, she and her colleagues have looked at how brain activity is linked to behavior in babies, things like how they regulate their emotions. And Charles Nelson, his work's been super important for understanding how babies develop memory, how they recognize faces. He also looks at how those early experiences actually shape the brain's structure.
I see.
And Mark Johnson, he's a big name in the neuroconstructivist view. He's studied the prefrontal cortex and those early signs of things like autism.
Okay.
And John Richards, he's contributed a lot to what we know about attention and perception in infants.
Wow. So many different perspectives.
I know, and they use all kinds of cool techniques to study those tiny brains, like
Mhm.
EEG, which measures the brain's electrical activity through, well, little electrodes on the scalp.
Okay.
MEG, which maps the brain's magnetic fields.
There.
And FNIRS, which looks at changes in blood oxygen levels.
Oh,
It's perfect for studying babies because
Yeah.
it's portable.
makes sense.
And one big thing they've found is that how a mother interacts with her baby in those first few months can actually predict how well the frontal lobe develops.
Really? So those early interactions have that much of an effect.
They do.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And we know the brain grows so fast in those first 2 years.
Oh, for sure. At birth, it's only about 25% of its adult weight. But by 2 years old, it's already up to 75%. Two of the most crucial things happening during that time are myelination and synaptogenesis. Myelination is when that fatty myelin sheath forms around the axons of neurons. It basically speeds up how brain cells talk to each other.
Okay.
Synaptogenesis is all about creating those connections between the dendrites.
So myelination is for speed, and synaptogenesis is for, like, making those connections.
You got it. Myelination starts even before birth and then goes into overdrive afterwards. For example, the visual pathways, they myelinate super quickly after birth. That's why babies' vision improves so fast. But the auditory pathways, they take longer. And some myelination keeps going into adolescence, even beyond. And in those first 2 years, the number of dendrites and synapses just explodes. Like, the brain makes almost twice as many connections as it'll actually use.
Why so many?
Well, the ones that are used a lot, they become stronger and more efficient. The others, the unused ones, well, those are pruned away. It's like the brain's way of tidying up.
So like a use it or lose it kind of thing.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that different parts of the brain, they don't all mature at the same time.
Okay.
The frontal lobe, the one for higher level thinking and making decisions, it's pretty immature at birth. It needs those first few years to develop those connections.
That makes sense.
So in that first year, the main thing is that babies get better at regulating their basic bodily functions and reflexes. More complex thinking that comes later, like the motor skills for reaching and grabbing, that develops around 2 months. Depth perception around 4 months. And those language areas are ready to go around 12 months.
So it's like a carefully timed sequence.
It is. And it's also really important to see how early deprivation, like if a baby doesn't get enough stimulation, can affect brain development.
Right.
Studies on those Romanian orphans, they show that those kids had way less brain activity than kids who grew up in more stimulating environments.
That's so sad.
It is. But the amazing thing is, the brain can also be incredibly resilient.
Resilient.
Yeah, like sometimes other parts of the brain can take over if one part's damaged.
Wow.
There was this kid, Michael Raybane, who had to have his left hemisphere removed.
Oh, wow.
And you know what? His right hemisphere took over and he could still speak.
That's incredible.
It really is. It shows that the brain can rewire itself, especially with the right experiences.
So what about brain development in childhood after those first couple of crazy years?
Well, the brain and nervous system keep developing, but not as fast as in infancy. These changes help kids get better at planning, paying attention, and their language skills really take off. In early childhood, the brain and head are still growing faster than the rest of the body because of that ongoing myelination and those dendrites branching out more. And myelination, it's really important for all kinds of skills, like hand-eye coordination. Those pathways get a lot of myelin by around age 4.
Okay.
And the areas for attention, those keep myelinating all the way through middle and late childhood. And even though the brain's not growing as fast as in infancy, there are still huge changes happening from about 3 to 15 years old, like growth spurts, followed by some tissue loss and reorganization.
So it's not just about getting bigger, it's about reorganizing.
You got it. And all that myelin and those connections, they help with memory and the ability to learn fast. Studies have even shown a link between more myelin by age 3 and better cognitive skills later on. We see big changes in middle and late childhood in those brain structures too, especially the pathways and circuits that go through the prefrontal cortex. This is that part of the brain that handles complex thinking.
Right.
And the prefrontal cortex, it develops from the bottom up. The sensory areas mature first, and then those areas that put all the information together, those come online later.
So as kids get older, they get better at things like paying attention and controlling their impulses. How does the brain change to reflect that?
Well, we use these brain imaging techniques, and they've shown that as kids go from like 7 years old to adolescence, there's a change in how the prefrontal cortex works.
Okay.
The activity becomes more focused, more efficient,
Okay.
and that's linked to better cognitive control, being able to focus, ignore distractions, resist doing something impulsive, and being flexible, switching between tasks. The prefrontal cortex, as kids grow, it starts to become like the conductor of the brain, coordinating everything else.
Interesting analogy.
It starts to favor those neural networks that involve the prefrontal cortex for problem solving.
Okay, so adolescence.
Yeah.
That's when emotions are often running high, and sometimes there's risky behavior. What's going on in their brains?
Teenage brains are a hot topic in research, and what we're seeing is that they're unique, still growing and changing. One big change is that the corpus callosum gets thicker. That's the bridge between the two sides of the brain.
Okay.
And a thicker corpus callosum means the two sides can talk to each other better. The prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of reasoning and self-control, that one keeps maturing well into adulthood, even later. But here's the thing. The limbic system, which handles emotions and rewards, especially the amygdala, the emotion center, that one matures earlier.
So teens have a mature emotion system, but their judgment and control centers aren't fully developed yet.
Exactly. And those skills, like being able to stop yourself from doing something risky, those don't fully develop until later, sometimes even in early adulthood.
Oh, wow.
So basically, they've got this drive for rewards and strong emotions, but the brakes aren't there yet. And that's been linked to the fact that the limbic system matures before the frontal lobes.
So it's like having a powerful engine but weak brakes.
Exactly. And we also see changes in brain chemicals during puberty. Dopamine, for example, increases in both the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system.
Okay.
Dopamine is all about seeking rewards.
So that explains a lot.
Right. It's been linked to risk-taking and addictive behaviors in teens. So this mismatch between that early maturing limbic system and the slower prefrontal cortex, that's probably why we see more risk-taking and problem behaviors in those teenage years.
It's like they're driving with a lead foot and no driving lessons yet.
Haha, that's a good way to put it. And this is where those fields of developmental social neuroscience and developmental cognitive